Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we're coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new albums. We are going to be talking about the latest album from singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran. We're talking about Subtract. And we're also going to be talking about the latest record from Billy Woods and Kenny Segal. We're going to be talking about Maps.
Absolutely, and really excited we are to talk about both of these albums from two very, very different artists. I always like when we get an opportunity to do a real odd couple episode. You know, sometimes our episodes can be thematically unified, and then sometimes we can just end up talking about two artists that could not be less related. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I think it's going to be the album we have least to say about. So I want to talk about Ed Sheeran's new album first. And I first of all want to up front acknowledge a question that may or may not be lingering, but to me, I think is important to deal with, which is why the hell are we reviewing this? Like, surely we would know better than to touch this, or surely we would, there would be no, surely we would let this be. Surely we'd be able to find something better, more interesting, more substantive to talk about. And the answer to that question is absolutely. This is a record where there's very little to talk about. There's very little to discuss. But I do think it's worth us reviewing this simply because we haven't really discussed Ed Sheeran's music on the show before. We talked about his heavily publicized trial in a recent episode of Jams and Tea Now, his copyright trial for Thinking Out Loud. And we sort of discussed Ed Sheeran's place in the music canon there. But we haven't really had a chance to talk about his music itself. And fortuitous as the timing may be, the climax of this trial happened to coincide with the release of a brand new album for him. I'm sure that's a complete coincidence. I don't see how it couldn't be, but at the same time, I have my suspicions. Anyway, we have a new album, Subtract. And look, this one's hotly awaited because I've been sure we all have been aware of Ed Sheeran since the Plus era. He came up, that plucky little ginger with the acoustic guitar came up out of the British Isles, completely took over the world by storm with those hits, those slappers, those Mumford & Son ripoff songs, completely took over the world with them. And from the jump, he was coming right out the gate with this concept, with this, concept is maybe too strong a word, motif. With his album titles. Ed Sheeran is going to be doing some quick math, right? Ed Sheeran's going to be taking us to school. Ed Sheeran's going to be showing us what 2 + 2 equals. And believe me, baby, it's not 5. So he hit us with Plus. That was the debut, right? And I was like, the joke around the schoolyard, because all my female friends in high school were huge Ed Sheeran fans. With this album, got a lot of play. Ed was, an icon. It was an idol, 18 was so huge. Lego House was so huge. Give Me Love was enormous. Give me love. I was the cynical guy, I was the cynical, smarmy dude being like, when's he gonna do Minus? right, fellas? Right, ladies? Minus. And sure enough, he decided that, that wasn't really his vibe. Skipped over Minus for 2014's X, or I guess Multiply. Multiply was the moment where Ed, buoyed by the success of his plucky acoustic Mumford & Sons ripoff songs on Plus, decided to vault his ambitions to world superstardom and embrace certain pop tropes, while also sort of maintaining the whole aesthetic and personality and presentation of the ginger, wide-eyed kid who's constantly heartbroken. There's even a song on Multiply called I'm a Mess. He's trying to embellish his personality as an artist while at the same time kind of reaching to cross over into the pop mainstream by getting some production, getting Pharrell on the album, Andrew Coleman on the album, I think Rick Rubin's on that record, Benny Blanco, Max Martin, all the collaborators trying to make Ed Sheeran even bigger, and it worked. And then 2017, we got Divide, Ed's biggest album ever, and still to date his worst record, by the way. The album that gave us Shape of You, the album that gave us The Unbearable Galway Girl. Castle on the Hill's all right, but, whatever.
That's a good song.
What in the hell are you doing?
Anyway, so we had Plus,
yeah,
we had Multiply.
Ed.
We had Plus, we had Multiply, we had Divide. Ed was setting up a theme, and each as he went through each of these mathematical symbols, there was this sense with which they were kind of representing how his career was going, eventually, sort of. But anyway, we got through those three. Right, okay. You can't skip minus forever, Ed. You can't do it. It's time. It's the only one left. And so Ed, sure enough, listened to the people, listened to logic, and released in 2019, finally, his long-awaited fourth album, the continuation of his series, the embellishment of his sound further, number 6 collaborations projects. That wasn't a real album. That didn't happen. No one listened to that. No one cared. Nope. But Ed Sheeran had to step away from the expectations that had been built up on him at this point to finally make Minus. He was just completely torn apart by those expectations. He couldn't live up to them. So I had to step away from it. It was like Sufjan Stevens after Illinois. He set out this precedent of this series, this ambitious series that he was going to have to capture. And he stepped away from it. He said, I can't do it. It's too much. Can't do it. But after a needed break, after that number 6 collaborations project, he decided, okay, for real this time, we're getting back to the series. We're finally going to put this to bed. It is finally time for Minus. And then he put out Equals, which was such a bewildering and confusing album. Ed's still one of the biggest stars in the world, but it's really, really funny because he hasn't really had an all-consuming hit since the Divide era. Now, Bad Habits from Equals did have a lot of radio success, and you could hear it for a while there, but it felt a little bit like, especially after how huge Shape of You was, it felt a little bit like diminishing returns in terms of that crossover success, world-consuming song, because number 6 didn't leave a dent, and Equals had Bad Habits, but even then, more people were making fun of that song than were really spinning it on repeat. It was kind of just, it felt like Ed was over. It felt like Ed's time in the sun had kind of come crashing down. His time being one of the most successful artists commercially was Jover, but look, I think that if he, and I was saying, I was thinking that I couldn't help but wonder if part of this could be attributed to the fact that he had abandoned, he had spoiled, he had ruined the series that he was building up at that point. He had neglected the Minus for too long, and now it was coming back to bite him on the ass. No one cared about Equals. You can't have Equals without Minus. That's what I'm always saying. That's how the saying goes. So, here we are. Enough of this unbearable intro. Finally, it's time for Ed Sheeran's Minus. Finally, it's time for the album that we've all been waiting for. It didn't come in the exact form that I wanted, but he's delivered. He's delivered Subtract. And fittingly, for something that symbolizes the removal, we have an album that sees Ed stripping back a lot of the excess, a lot of the layering, a lot of the fluff of his bigger albums, certainly of Equals, which is an album that sounds like a fucking kaleidoscopic clown car orgasm compared to this. It's taken it to the boards with Aaron Dessner of The National, one Mr. Folklore himself, hearing it back, laying down the jams with those soft, muted synth beats that Aaron's become so known for, and that particular smooth, crisp indoor guitar sound, slightly subdued, slightly muffled, but just given this particular hue that's become so distinctive. And we have the album itself. It's not his worst album. It's not as bad as Equals, and it's definitely not as bad as Divide. It's not as pointless as the number 6 collaborations project, which is just kind of Ed, and just seemed like Ed was just sort of giving up entirely on any pretense of having a personality and just completely giving himself over. Ed has a personality here, or at least I feel as though he's trying to channel one. He's trying to be real, basically, and it's not a thing he's trying to do for the first time. But I think he's trying to channel this particular humbled, stripped back, man in a room sound that he hasn't really looked for since Plus consistently, and that he hasn't really channeled in any way since Multiply and Fits and Spurts. Like every Multiply and Divide have these moments like this, but they're always produced Like, it's funny because those albums are produced to be pop records, so the acoustic ballads are overproduced, right? Like, they sound sharper and slicker than they should be to get to the kind of naked emotional truth of what Ed's going for. So they've never really worked in that context. But here, with Aaron Dessner at his side, Ed's able to channel down and create an aesthetic that fits the kind of songs he wants to write. For the most part, I guess, I mean, and here's the thing, right? The aesthetic fits for Ed here, but in every respect, what this album is, it is as good, as bad, however you want to, whatever angle you want to look at it from, it is, the quality of this album is directly proportional to Ed's quality as a songwriter. He's not making any kind of major leaps forward here. He's not shifting his focus in any meaningful way here. He is adjusting the overall tone of the songs and finding a producer to fit that so that he's in this particular mold for like 80% of it. Although there's occasionally songs like Eyes Closed and Curtains that sort of veer away from that a little bit and don't really fit in as well. But still, all the same, Ed's in his confessional mode here. Ed's in his acoustic ballad, Guy on the Seat mode here. He's come back full circle. There's a vulnerability to Ed here that is as truthful and as well realized as his songwriting, which is as shallow and empty and vassal as it's ever been. It's someone singing plaintively and emotionally to a brick wall. You know, there's this sense of posturing and trying to capture all of these real emotions, but they land with a thud because there's no sense of stakes to them. There's no sense of place to them. There's no sense of meaning or grandiosity to them. There's just emptiness. It's a weird album. What do you guys think?
Well, because I know neither of you two are going to make this parallel, I'm going to be the one to do it. And it's the obvious one, that being Taylor Swift. Now, Ed and Taylor have worked together before, and obviously there's an Aaron Dessner-sized elephant in the room in that both of them elect to work with an indie darling producer who's known for something more tasteful, more minimal, something that appeals to tastemakers a lot more, and to take a turn in their sound and showcase perhaps a side of them that maybe they either haven't capitalized on or haven't fully embraced yet. And I think the thing with folklore in hindsight is that a lot of people can probably criticize folklore and Evermore, for that matter, for being albums that maybe don't pivot enough into what they're trying to do. Maybe for people, those albums are still so overridingly Taylor Swift albums that they're still pop albums at the end of the day. Maybe they don't embrace the turn enough for them to appeal to that new side. But the thing is that aesthetically, I feel like that pivot is made confidently. And from a songwriting perspective, I feel like there is an active attempt to take what Taylor did on those albums and make it feel like it stood out from the rest of her body of work. So that I understand. But the thing is with Subtract is that it feels like he's trying to do that spiritually, but he doesn't. There's nothing here that feels like it's an active attempt to do anything other than be an Ed Sheeran album. Like, everything that he does on here is so on the nose. Anytime he goes for an emotion, it elicits groans, not sympathy. He talks about lots of real things on here: heartbreak, drinking, drugs. All of these things are no easy matter. Like, I get it. But every single lyric feels like it is ripped out of the Songwriting 101 handbook. Everything here in isolation feels like he has taken it from somewhere else. I'm talking bare minimum shit here. And the reason this is so infuriating is because this is supposed to be his album where he tries to appeal to people like us. This is where he's enlisting the right people. And okay, Ed, I'm willing to give you a chance now. I don't like your other albums. I don't particularly care for your music, but you are inoffensive enough for me to say, you know what? If you want to lay down the gauntlet, I'll pick it up. Fine. Give me something. And it just feels like he doesn't fucking try. Throughout this whole album, you're sitting there listening to these lyrics, these metaphors, these tired fucking metaphors that half the time they don't even fucking work. And the other half, they're exactly the first thing you think of. If you pluck a 9-year-old out of any given English class in the United States of America and you ask them to come up with a metaphor, odds are it's going to be no different from an Ed Sheeran song. And that's the thing, is that all of this feels like window dressing to some degree. And, that's fine. Like, whatever. If you want to window dress into being this indie singer-songwriter that you're not, but that you want to appear as though you are, I like that aesthetic well enough. Like, that appeals to me. We listen to lots of music like this. Like, there's, piano on this, and instantly it's just like, oh, hey, it's the Light Years piano. I like that. That's a good idea. But even Aaron he's asleep. I mean, Jesus.
It's more like the "your mind is not your friend" piano on this album.
That's probably
It's
a little
just a
bit
little-
more apt, frankly.
Aaron Dessner's presence on here is just more than a little reminiscent of Nigel Godrich's on We.
Well,
Yeah, it's
I think
certainly identifiable as his production, but it still feels like
I'm
there's
not
an
sure that
active
it is.
attempt to sort of. I could hear elements of the production and just be like, oh, I remember when these ideas have appeared on songs that I like before. It's never
I
in
agree.
enough volume to feel like it creates like an atmosphere, but it's always recognizable.
It's the toolkit, the Aaron Dessner toolkit is being used here. It's like the Aaron Dessner patch has been laid down on these
it's
songs.
The baseline. You just kind of feel like you're listening to the faint bits of atmospheric score from Come On, but set to like an atmospheric guitar ballad. Like, that's pretty much it. And like, yeah, in that respect, the production is like it functions, but at the same time, it's so focused on being minimal and tasteful that it is rarely ever evocative. Take the opener, for example. Other than the fact that this is just tired metaphors, the song, it's minimal, it's subtle, it's tasteful, and it does nothing. There's a point here at which Ed attempts to have like a vocal rise at the very like final third of this song, but it comes and goes so quickly that it's barely accentuated and just fizzles out into nothing. There are attempts to unify this whole thing in that there are lots of oceanic analogies, metaphors, similes, and it's called Subtract. So it's about loss. Do you get it? Do you get the next level shit? The thing is with Ed is that it's almost like at this point he can't break away from his folk pop strengths, but he keeps coming back to the well on songs like Eyes Closed, which, I mean, there's nothing different from this song and like something on Divide, for instance. Like, there are lyrics on here, every song reminds me that you're gone, and dancing with my eyes closed, because everywhere I look, I still see you. Like, does this man seriously have one mode? Because every lyric on this album is like this, where it's just like, again, it's not even like a full complete metaphor. It's like he gets halfway there and then just stops and then moves on to the next thing. Like, the only thing that makes a song like this notable, other than it being a little bit more upbeat, is that he does that I thing in the chorus, and it fucking sucks and I hate it. The vocalizing, whenever it appears on this, please stop. It does not fit the aesthetic of this album at all, and it makes me nauseous on the hook here. Like, again, there is a faint build here instrumentally, and yet it is completely inert. every song on this album has the exact same emotional and sonic tone. Like, every single one of them. You may call that a unified aesthetic. I call it fucking monotonous. Like, it's just boring. And the thing is that a lot of these songs just sort of revel in this kind of singular mode. And one thing that's interesting about the albums that we've been reviewing and about the album that we're going to review next is that there's a unified theme between a lot of them, between The National, Indigo D'Souza, Billy Woods, and to some degree this. That being that they are all about a sense of being stuck, being rendered like just an inability to do anything about your circumstances. Except with Ed's case, it's channeled in the form of nothing being dynamic about the presentation at all. And like, there are moments where, like last week, Riley, for instance, posited when we talked about reviewing this album that we could take it as a critical challenge, you know, to try and say something positive about the Ed Sheeran album, because, you know, hating on Ed Sheeran is boring. But the thing is that there are moments on here, like, for instance, there's the incredibly not good song Dusty. There are moments on here lyrically that I think are the most evocative of anything on the album. There's some decent imagery and wordplay here that is significantly far removed from the boring shit on the rest of this album. It's a shame that it keeps coming back to the lyrical refrain of drop the needle on Dusty, which, shut the fuck up. What does this have to do with anything?
Never a good idea to directly reference a musician by name on a song, because all it's going to want to do is make people think, oh yeah, that's a great musician. I wish I were listening to them.
It's like all this does is make me think of the Let's Marvin Gaye and Get It On. Like, every single time without fail, whenever like a pop songwriter does this shit. Like, it's songs like this when
Ed
I'm
Sheeran
reminded
definitely does not condone that particular reference point.
No, of course not. How could he? But it's times like this when I'm reminded of just how badly you can fuck up something like this, which is relatively simple in its ambitions. Like, we, the three of us, like a lot of music like this, and we like Aaron Dessner. But to the point where I personally feel a duty to tear an album like this a new asshole, because it's a poignant reminder that just because all the ingredients are there doesn't mean that the chef knows how to cook them. But there are the most notable moments on this album, positively speaking anyway, for me, appear in the back half, most notably the last three songs. The song No Strings, I think, is the best song on here by a pretty decent amount, frankly. Nothing is fundamentally exceptional about it other than the most like middle of the road things that occasionally remain solid about this album all kind of crystallize here, but it's the core idea that's effective. It's like using the bedrock of knowing you love somebody enough to brave it through the tough parts of a relationship. It's a good core idea, and I think it is decently embodied on here. It's not, he doesn't do anything to shoot himself in the foot like he does on other songs on here. Sycamore is, you know, there are effective emotions in the story on here, but the boring melodies, the production that screams C- Hallmark original movie, and just kind of a continued failure to make the central idea develop with the titular Sycamore, which feels like a weird digression when it comes to the context of the rest of the song. It feels like this is in service of like a net neutral, like it's a huge big ol' woof 5 out of 10 whatever. And the last song, The Hills of Aberfeldy, is fine. It's pretty, but it's saccharine. The strings on here make it sound like a Dixie Chicks song. That's not a bad thing. I like the Dixie Chicks, but there are songs on here like Vega before this little run where I don't really know what, like, I'm sure there is a context for the title of this
Why
song.
are you referencing
but
Street Fighter, Ed?
Yes, thank you. That is all I could think about on this fucking song, other than Ed's terrible falsetto on this song, and the lyric at the very beginning that's "I love listening to the sound of heaven." every time he talks about like being Vega, I just imagine him screaming in pain trying to main Vega in Street Fighter. The song before that, Spark, has an AB rhyme scheme that I refer to in my notes as some real yo gabba gabba shit. The falsetto on Borderline is excruciating to listen to. And I guess the last notable thing I have to say is that the song Colorblind, it's nice to know that when Ed goes for a proper metaphor or something even relatively ambitious for him, he fumbles it into total incoherency. He spends the whole time comparing this girl in the song and what she does to colors, and then says they should paint the night colorblind, and I have no idea what this means contextually. It doesn't help that the instrumental here sounds like one of those holiday commercials that tries like way too hard to make people cry by showing you some grandpa whose wife died, and he's all lonely, and then his grandkids show up at the end, and then it's like, here's the Pillsbury logo. That's exactly what half of this album sounds like. It's just, the next song has this, did you know that life can be beautiful, that if you let the sunshine shine, and then the next song immediately after, it's just like, everything sucks. This is like listening to a box of Kleenex.
So, as I said earlier, I don't think this is Ed's worst album. In a number of respects, I think this is his best since Multiply. I just think that Divide, Number 6, and Equals are all worse than this, and more.
Yeah.
Like, not only are they worse than this, they're more facile, they're more cynical, and they veer away from his strengths more so than this does. Look, I don't think this is a good album, but the degree to which I dislike it stems largely from how much I just don't like Ed Sheeran. More so than there are these things that are wrong with it on an artistic level. I don't feel the same animosity that you feel, Jake, and I do think that there's things that this record does technically and for the kind of songwriter Ed wants to be that he does quite well. I think the biggest strength of this record, and again, I'm trying to separate this from the degree to which personally this thing does not vibe with me, but the biggest strength of the record, I think, is Ed's voice. It's as painful as that is to say, because I don't enjoy listening to Ed sing. But I certainly enjoy listening to him sing more than I enjoy listening to him do that weird speak, sing, not quite rapping thing he sometimes does. And he doesn't do it too much on this, but he does do it occasionally. And that's where I check out. But I think that Ed is a talented vocalist. I think when he's in a particular range with his singing, I think he can be really, really good. And some of the best elements of this record, I think, are vocal melodies. Like, I think that there are really strong vocal melodies, and the songs in particular that where this leapt out to me were End of Youth and Sycamore. There's some really, like the chorus melody on End of Youth, I think is really, really nice. It's that he has. I make it sound like shit because I can't sing, but he really lands it. The problem is that the words he's singing are so facile and so shallow and don't capitalize on the emotion that he's able to bring through that delivery at all. I mean, End of Youth is one of the most asinine songs on the record lyrically as well. We spend our youth with arms and hearts wide open, and then the dark gets in, and that's the end of youth. Like the redundancy and the use of the word youth there, it just doesn't land very well at all. It's meaningless. It's silly. It doesn't actually say anything emotionally tangible. And Ed has this problem consistently, right? Where I do believe he wants to be, and he considers himself a singer-songwriter, and he's trying to get that across. And I can hear him trying that. I can hear him really leaning into that throughout this record, but I don't want to be as cruel as to say it's from a lack of effort. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he's put a lot of effort in. It just doesn't show. It just doesn't. I can't reconcile that with some of these lyrics, which are so first draft, which are so just unbelievably one note and two-dimensional.
I'm sure there is effort, but the fact that I have to ask the question as to whether or not it's there is, in fact, the problem.
It's almost worse if this is the effort.
Yeah, to some degree, I agree. Like, but I do think that the biggest strength of this record, and this is one that that comes from comparison, and is maybe a little bit more difficult for you two to see because you haven't had that like consuming Ed Sheeran's album context, different albums context. But this strips away so many things that have kneecapped a lot of his worst records. Like, he is really,
I'm sure it
focused
does.
away from some of his more worse impulses here, and I have to give him props for that, for figuring out a way to synthesize this into something that leans more into his strengths than his weaknesses. But the problem is that the sum total of his strengths is just not remotely close to the sum total of what the album is and what the album contains. And Aaron Dessner, I mean, personally, if I didn't know Aaron produced this, I would think this person is really trying to produce like Aaron Dessner. It totally comes through from here. I can see that it is trying to make a kind of record that's not all that dissimilar to what Taylor Swift did with Folklore, although he doesn't have the ambition of the, central of the character-driven drama storytelling that she has. So it kind of just feels a little bit like Ed playing the hits, a little bit recycling old song ideas that he's done before. It's funny you said that Eyes Closed. So, Jake, it's funny you said that Eyes Closed sounded like a Divide era song, because it fucking is a Divide era song. He wrote it in 2018. It's only getting put on an album now. You're completely right about that. I think it's one of the worst songs here. It's one of the more synthetic ones, but it has this really obvious, like not even obvious. It has that really dull 4-chord progression that it does absolutely nothing with. It's super lame. I echo the sentiments about Colorblind, which is, Ed's worst tendency as a songwriter is when his poor taste in metaphors leans into the truly childish. And that is what this song is. It's completely juvenile. It's trivial. It takes one very stupid 5-year-old kid idea and hammers it to the point of insignificance. Some days we're red and some days we both think green. This is the problem with Ed's color metaphor here is, right, lots of songwriters have done the color metaphor thing to communicate emotions or whatever. I'm feeling blue, blah, 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 whatever. Dabba-dee, dabba-die.
Loving you is red.
The reason why different songwriters use that color metaphor is because it's a really fast, easy, and obvious way to communicate an emotion. Everyone knows what blue means. Everyone knows what red means to a certain extent. You get a little bit more abstract, but the things are there. Problem is, for the most part in this song, the connection between the colors that is talking about and the emotion he's trying to convey is incoherent. Like, I don't know what it means that, some days we both think green. I guess maybe that some days they get caught up in their careers, they're financially concerned, but then that doesn't really seem to bear out with the rest of the lyrics as well. It's a strange and just completely confusing song that never resolves into a coherent thought. Musically, though, the one moment on the record, well, there's 2 moments on the record, I think, where Aaron and Ed together kind of add a little bit more substance to the music of the record. The first moment being the kind of electric guitar infusion on Curtains, which livens up the proceedings considerably, considering how dull it had been up to that point. And I am also fond of the sort of vaguely Celtic acoustic guitar on Hills of Aberfeldy, which ends the record in a nice place, I think. Yeah. I think that song is probably the best one on the record, I think. But yeah, the asinine lyrical construction, metaphors, wordplay, however you want to phrase it, on Colorblind carries through into Spark as well, which is just a complete non-starter of a song, which includes the unintentionally hilarious line, like a band-aid over deeper cuts. We tried. Ed Sheeran's lyrical construction is the definition of like setting something up and watching it fall flat to the ground. Like, you can see how he writes in these lines. You can see him putting it together and then landing the line with a complete thud. Like a band-aid over deeper cuts. We tried. It just completely dies in that moment. And he does that with basically every single lyric. No, believe me, no one wants to be able to give Ed Sheeran credit more than I do. I'm willing him to succeed. I'm willing him to kind of put the work in and hone his songcraft. I don't think that, and this is a philosophical belief I have about art, I don't think that anyone has a complete ceiling to their creative possibility. I think every single artist has the ability to improve and to go further and further and further. I don't think that anyone ever reaches their ceiling, but I do think there's a point where some people stop trying, and I do think there's a point where some people stop challenging themselves. And I don't think about it cynically, because I know it's hard, it's tough. You're trying to maintain a career. You're trying to not get sued out the ass for every song you make. You're trying to maintain a legacy as well. It's not a very relatable or necessarily real struggle, but big artists like this, as their career goes on, you get these more things get more difficult and things get harder, and the nature of who they are shifts as they try to figure out what their whole deal is going to be, what their personality is going to be, what their career is going to look like as they go on. And Ed just seems to be kind of ducking the question completely with this album. I mean, Subtract is a good title because this feels like a huge step back. What this really did is it made me appreciate Shape of You. Because, like, this is the thing. I think Ed Sheeran wants to be the heartfelt singer-songwriter who can appeal to the masses, who can be this, object of affection, who can be the artist. He wants to be an artist, right? But the thing that Ed Sheeran is best at, in as much as you could say, because I think his greatest skill is his voice, which is very attuned to pop sensibilities. So I think the thing that he's best at is not the heartfelt singer-songwriter. It's not the artist mode. It is the meaningless pop song mode. And now I'm not saying I enjoy those meaningless pop songs, but I think that I find them in a weird sense less insufferable than I find this earnest attempt at, because when Ed fully commits here to doing this, I'm a real guy, I'm writing real songs about heartbreak and love and all these things that I experience, and I'm not, it's like those pop songs but stripped of any of the stuff that made them infectious radio hits, that made them kind of have this sort of lasting power, and it's just the kind of skeleton beneath all of that. Take away Max Martin from a massive smash hit pop song and you have the fucking demo underneath it, and that's kind of what these are. Big pop producers know what to do with his voice more than Ed knows what to do with his pen, right? And that's kind of where we're at. Ed, I think, has a talent for coming up with good vocal melodies, as I've said, and in the hands of people who know what to do with those vocal melodies, they can be sculpted and crafted into something that can conquer the world. As annoying as you may find it, and it can be annoying, but there is a place for him, and there's a thing that he does that no one does like him. And this is not it. This is the thing that he does that fucking a million people do every day. What I want to hear is Ed Sheeran conquering the world, and I can point it and say this song is annoying or whatever, yada yada yada, but I can at least say, he's doing this thing that no one else is doing. Do you have anything you want to add at this point, Morgan?
Riley, proceed.
All right, let's move into our second review of the day, which is the new album from one Mr. Billy Woods, Maps. Now, we have reviewed Billy Woods on the show before. Last year, we reviewed his album Ethiops, which was a production collaboration with Preservation. And we also talked about in 2021, the album that he released as Arm & Hammer with his creative partner, Elucid, Haram. Both of those were great albums. We were collectively particularly fond of Ethiops last year, which I think was one of our favorite albums of the year. Collectively, certainly one of my favorite albums of the year. I think one of the best hip-hop records of the decade so far. So yeah, that was a huge sort of moment of complete connection for us with Billy, with what he was doing, especially because we tried to talk about him in the past, and we'd succeeded, but also at the same time it's hard to approach an artist like Billy Woods in the format that we use, because he's so dense, he's so demanding, he's so obtuse in some respects that it can be really, really difficult to get a solid framework on what he's doing. But he's never an artist who lets you down. He's never an artist who delivers anything half-baked. And he's been on a particular run, frankly, ever since 2019's Hiding Places, which was the last album that he made as a production collaboration with Kenny Segal, who is the man behind the boards on this new album too. So in a sense, it's a sequel to that record. I mean, more just really in that sense, I suppose, more so than thematically, although Billy does touch on a number of things that have been common referential recurring themes for him throughout his career. But specifically, Maps, as the title kind of implies, is an album about being in transit, and it's about being on tour, and it's about Billy's current state of being, which is someone who is incredibly prolific, someone who is always writing, someone who's always performing, someone who's always saturated and maybe even completely consumed by the work they do and by the life they lead, and where that leaves him at the end of the day. There's a lot that's striking about this record. There's a lot that's gripping about this record. There's a lot that's immediate about this record. All of those things, more so than you might even expect from Billy. I think this is one of his best records. I think this is absolutely one of his, funnily enough, I think it's one of the easiest ones of his to get into that I would recommend to people who are not all that familiar with him, just because I think there's a lot of immediacy and sharpness to the way these songs are arranged, even if Billy's lyrical style and abstraction is as present as ever. I think there's still a through line of relatability and even a sort of light irreverence to aspects of this album that make it a bit of a sigh of relief compared to some of his more morose records. And look, I say that, and yet there are still moments on this album that are frankly flooring and emotionally draining as fuck. But even still, you kind of have to expect that to some degree from Billy. He still delivers a record that is really entertaining, that's really delightful, that's really full of surprises, that's consistently just captivating in all respects, and really fucking pops. And this is the thing about Billy, is that often to embellish or to provide a suitable bedrock for his lengthy, digressive, dense abstractions, a lot of the beats on previous records have to linger within this particularly moody space. And that's undoubtedly true of elements of this record as well. But because of the way that Kenny Segal produces, in particular because of the drum tones he uses, there's always this pop to these pieces that simultaneously makes them feel frightening and eerie and kind of evil in certain respects, but also makes them feel really immediate and just tangible and sharp and relieving in certain senses as well. Like you can get into this world a little bit more because it's extending something out to you that you can connect to, as opposed to just kind of the eerie, murky haze of some of his other recent records. And this is something that was also true of Hiding Places as well, which remains one of my absolute favorite Billy records. And honestly, it wasn't until listening to this, finalizing my thoughts on this morning, I've been listening to it throughout the week, that I think I've come to the conclusion that this may actually be my new favorite record of Billy's. Early stages still. I mean, he's the kind of artist you need to let the records marinate in your brain for a long time to really kind of just begin to piece it apart and figure out how you feel. And that's always, music critic shorthand, but it's really true in the case of Billy. But yeah, Maps has a lot to offer. Maps is a record that feels like a good career summary, but particularly the last few years for Billy, his most prolific period. And you get a sense of both the cumulative exhaustion of being Billy Woods for an extended period of time, the kind of existence he lives. He's very direct, he's very frank about his lifestyle, about all the traveling he has to do, about performing at shows, the sense of fatiguing feeling that comes through from that, and the emotional and psychological results of that, which I'll get into a little bit more as we get into the review. But that's my kind of overview of what Maps is. Jake and Morgan, I'd love to hear from you at this point. What was your expectations going into this, and what was your overall thoughts on this album once you'd had a chance to sort of soak it in?
Much like the Arm & Hammer album that we reviewed, fucker be dense. So I still feel like I need more time with it, but I think this is confident number 2 of the year so far for me, and potentially even number 1 at some point, considering how much this has potential to grow. I'm not sure anyone in this sphere currently has a pen game as strong as Billy Woods. And the performances are here to match that. Just every song feels like a sort of individual story, and it kind of reminds me of like a one-man show in a way, like on a stage. He is the centerpiece of it, and all of them are just so smartly written and curiosity inducing and enticing. It's the kind of good writing that really kicks your mind into overdrive and makes you want to do something creative. The sound of this thing is unbelievable. Like, just it doesn't, this kind of abstract jazz infused hip hop doesn't really sound much better than this ever. And it's the kind of hip hop that I'm really a sucker for. Home run as far as I'm concerned.
I really resonate with that one-man show thing, because not only is there not only does that come through in the performances and the way he kind of sets himself up, obviously the performative aspect of this is what it's like to be me and to be going on stage and then to be leaving stage and dipping sound checks, as he says in one song, and doing all these different things that are part of the lifestyle. You know, it's very much like it's not a funny album, really. He's not cracking wise or whatever. There's pithy humor in it, which I think is Billy's style at certain points. But he does have this sort of stand-up persona sort of thing. He does have this thing, and he has this kind of not predictable, but almost formulaic thing he does where he starts a song with like a motif or an idea, or he sets a scene, and then it's like for a verse or two or for a minute or so, you go on this really abstract tangent of his thought processes and different things that the setting or the setup of the song bring to mind. And then by the end of the song, you've come full circle back to what the song was about, or you've landed on a particular emotional note that feels like Billy's thought process has all led him to this. And because of that structure that always leaves you with a punch at the end of the song, it keeps you locked in to the album experience, right? It keeps you captivated. It keeps you completely, whereas with some of the more, avant-garde stylings of some of his previous records, it can be a little bit difficult to find here nor there between some of the songs. And that aspect of having a quite clear and easy to sort of attach to conceptual bent, not that his other records don't have conceptual bent, but having this one be so, I think, immediately easy to read and be presented in this way that has this sort of performative element to it, both directly and in a meta sense, I think makes it so engaging all the way through.
Not only do I love this album, but I think it's just as good as the albums that I've heard from him previous to this, which granted is not very many, and I need to rectify that just because Billy is both prolific and remarkably consistent in his output and, has like a decade's worth of great albums behind him, which just goes to show the level that he's operating at right now, which is, it feels almost unprecedented, his continued level of success. Like, I really loved Hiding Places when I first heard it, and it's an album that I've just kept coming back to over and over again, and I was like, yeah, this is probably the one for me. And then I heard Aethiops last year and was like, God, no, maybe it's this one, because there's a real lingering darkness on that album from last year that was really captivating. The production on there was consistently intoxicating and does kind of feel like it fits within that moody aesthetic that Billy had, but for me retained a kind of off the wall sense of unpredictability that it's unparalleled. I love those albums almost as much as each other, and this I think is basically every bit as good. And I was almost a bit wary just because looking from the outset, like, this is a 44-minute album that has 17 tracks, and like from the outside looking in, it's kind of like, I don't know if like that's going to be able to sort of sustain itself, just because if you have a lot of songs that are shorter in length, like Billy himself is always such a commanding, dense presence that combined with the amount of features that are on this, it's like, are these songs going to last long enough to retain the impact that he's had in the past? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. This has a number of songs that frankly could have made it onto our best songs under 2 minutes prompt from a couple of weeks ago. Because they always fit snugly into the construction of the album itself, and almost like they last as long as they need to last. Like, as soon as Billy is done with a song, it'll be over. And that's, it could come across as kind of brief or tangential, but to me, there's a focus, there is a concision to the presentation of this and to the theme of this. Because Ethiops was an album that was very much about living like you were constantly under this omnipresent surveillance, whether it be actual surveillance, people in your life, enemies, the police, all that kind of stuff. It's living under the eye of Big Brother, essentially, and what that does to you and how it affects your psyche. And this has a lot of that on there too. There are lots of really clever lines on here that I appreciate. There's a moment where he remarks about the production of a song having so much tape hiss that the FBI listening to him get frustrated while doing it, which is, again, just one of the many insanely clever and very funny bars on here. And Billy is funny very frequently on here. That said, this is a fucking dark album. The upbeat and spry production kind of throws you for a loop a little bit. But once you really dig into this album is primarily about being stagnant. It's about not being able to move forward. It's about being caught in a box of glass panels and only being able to see your life take place in third person while you feel stuck, which feels like an overriding theme of the past couple of records that we've covered on here. And as far as that theme goes, I think Billy captures it the best of any of those artists do. He manages to imbue this theme into each and every one of these songs in one way or another, whether it's a quick lyrical allusion or just the general topic of something. That to me shows a real focus, a real restraint on Billy's part, but it also isn't an excuse for him to allow breathing room. Billy raps the way most people think, and he does it as quickly as he does, which is interesting because he has that kind of spoken word delivery, something that's like not fully kind of melodic or rhythmic, but still has elements of those two things, but still feels like, you know, you're listening to somebody on like a podium or something. But it's this very, very specific flow that he rides that is both too quick for you to keep up with, but also kind of perfect to sort of sustain a kind of potency. Like the first two tracks on here, for instance, are both just quintessential kind of Billy Woods. Like there's, you know, dense rhymes, clever wordplay, historical allusions, and just everything that makes him difficult to digest but really rewarding to come back to, which is one of the main appeals of Billy's discography, is that these albums are albums that I'll be listening to in 5 years and still get tons out of, because there is so much to what's going on here with the wordplay. Billy never lets that get ahead of him or lets it get away from him, I guess. Like he's got lyrics like on the first song in here where he calls God a hater, which is just, again, top tier funny Billy Woods moment, but is also kind of the thesis of these last couple of records that he has, where he really does feel like God has just shied away from him and left him by the wayside. It's so captivating because on this album specifically, it does feel like the kind of one-man show, and every time the scene kind of changes, there's this starkness to it. There's this real kind of old black and white movie grittiness to the paintings and portraiture of the imagery on here. But then you have stuff like Soundcheck, which really gets at a new theme of this record, which is the actual process of artistry, the actual channeling your life and then turning it into song, essentially, which is not something that he's stayed away from, but seems to be a really prominent theme on this record as a whole. Like when he talks on Soundcheck, just like this is the stumbling blocks that Billy encounters by living in this state of like heightened awareness that he's in. It's something that repeatedly causes him to fuck up things that he feels that he shouldn't, or things that should have set in as patterns in his brain that's embodied by that refrain to forget the lyric at the live show, which you know, it just keeps emphasizing the pressure and the stakes that feel suffocating to him. And it does that by complementing it and contrasting Billy all the time with this really smooth jazzy production that just always sounds fucking amazing. I love the Quell Chris feature on this. He's uncharacteristically kind of cold and slick on here. Yeah, like it's a really good mode for him. And I love the follow-up in the lyrical refrain at the end of the song, the after the forget the lyric, the every victory Pyrrhic. Billy feels that his whole life is essentially a Pyrrhic victory. And he goes and elaborates on that on basically everything on here. Rapper Weed, like it starts with a lyric that really just, this in particular just kind of haunts me, and I don't know why, the slurping noodles from clear soup. Like there's often times where on Aethiops it had kind of a almost grotesque bent to a lot of its lyricism. This seems to be a little bit more interested in tragic snapshots of the mundane, which is like really rendered more effective as Billy manages to imbue that mundanity with pathos and a constant sense of insecurity with his surroundings. He really gets into the minutia of being a performer on songs like this, and there's just this moment halfway through this song where he laughs to himself, and it's just so fucking chilling. like he sounds legitimately broken when he does it. It's like, and then at the end he's got the lyrical passage says, "Toss me in the fire, good and crackling." It's a great lyric because you don't know if he's referring to fire in the sense that it'll just kill him and end his strife, or if it's a forge that'll make him stronger. Or maybe since it's fire, it's a common symbol of rebirth and he wants to go through a transformation. Maybe it's all three of these things. You don't know at any given moment. Every single song on here has something to love. There's the bass run at the start of Blue Smoke, which is nuts. And then Billy matches that with his flow, and it's insane. Bad Dreams Are Only Bad Dreams is so smoky and forlorn. It's like I'm watching some sort of Chris Marker or Spike Lee-esque montage set to jazz and being narrated by Billy. And there's, you know, the echoed tones on a song like Babylon by Bus are just so despondent. The drums are so clattered. There's such a moroseness to this album, and everything that is presented as being positive or happy is presented as being so fleeting and brief. And then there's the fucking shrapnel feature on here on Babylon by Bus, which is just fearsome. Really reminds me, like, the production and the switch up here really reminds me of some of the tracks on Aethiopes, just that kind of buzzing, beeping synth and that just sort of industrial kind of percussive quality that has. There's the part where he refers to his relationship with these words, rapping, as a stand-in for like Munchausen by proxy, once again kind of elaborating on his relationship with music. And I can do this with every song on this album, and it all really, really coheres into something I think is just an endlessly impressive statement.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back and forth a little bit and let's talk about some of the sort of individual moments, because there's so much that's striking about the impact that some of these songs leave on an individual level that is so beautifully cumulative, and the way that the whole thing spirals into this continuous narrative, right? Because there's a framing device on this album. Billy is going on a tour, right? He's about to leave at the beginning of the record. At the first couple of songs, he's on the way out, and then the last two songs in the album, he's arriving home. And you get this constant miasma of dissociated and disconnected events that are happening to him, things he's kind of walking his way through, experiencing presently and absently as he's kind of in the whirlwind of that process. I actually think that everything that's great about Billy as a writer, you could get a kind of perfect distillation of it just from that 1 minute 20-second intro track, Kenwood Speakers, which is the song that on the face of it seems to be about gentrification, about the idea of the place that you live in or the places that are familiar to you changing due to forces outside of your control. But there's a kind of, within the narrative of the album as well, there's a deeper meaning to it of like the insecurity and the sense of helplessness that comes with needing to go away, needing to go on tour, needing to leave a certain place and not knowing what you'll come back to. And the way that Billy establishes that with just a few bars in this song is really, really striking. I mean, he has this kind of Game of Thrones reference where he talks about, you know, if this place is going to get gentrified, I'm not trying to leave it empty-handed because of blue-eyed White Walkers in King's Landing. And that's a really funny moment. But he also just kind of spirals around this place. He's walking the streets. He's uncertain of what he sees. He's confronted by ugliness, and he's confronted by this echoing voice of insecurity in his mind, and about the state of things and about the permanence or lack of permanence in that place. So that kind of sense of instability establishing the album and then going into Soft Landing, which is like, there's a lot, Billy kind of, again, establishes what the song, the place for the song, and then goes off on tangents here. But there's a lot about the song that is intensely relatable if you've ever been like traveling on planes a lot of times in short succession, right? You just get this fatigue that sets in and this complete like numbness that happens, and it's painful, it sucks, it's annoying being on planes, but you just kind of completely switch out of yourself in that process. And Billy sort of trying to relax, trying to be able to like smoke a spliff and just trying to be able to switch everything off, but also like having to conform himself and having to kind of exist in this place that where he's restricted and shut in. With that sarcastic sort of Nina Simone feeling good referencing Hook, is a very, very Billy Woods, very true to his sense of humor. This dissociative freestyle poetry that he goes on, then landing back with that hook and with the the takeoff and landing motif is really great. Rapper Weed is a really, really funny song as well. Like, so a lot of this album is about Billy being sort of on tour, in transit, kind of going through the motions, but he also uses this as an excuse to kind of land some sort of pointed barbs at aspects of the industry that he works in of fakeness and inauthenticity in the people that he's surrounded by as well. And there's some neat little commentary on this as well about rappers having their own strain of weed that's just completely overpriced and totally disappointing in every respect, and using that as a kind of microcosm for what he sees as a low effort and the industry that and what he sees is that the industry that he exists within breeds by its own nature is this kind of like this constant looking for shortcuts. Babylon by Bus is an IDM white boy. Got to give a shout out to the Aphex Twins Selected Ambient Beats Volume 2 sampling on this track. Very eerie and captivating, but also the beat on this song is kind of crazy. Like, this is a really short track, but it becomes frenzied and frantic and overwhelming by the time you get to the end of it. And I mean, look, we have to just talk here for a minute about Year Zero, which is the kind of centerpiece of the album, the collaboration with one Mr. Danny Brown, and getting Danny Brown on the track, dropping a fucking triple X flow, dropping some of his most fucking just brutal delivery that I've heard from him in a long time. Like, we talked about the JPEG Mafia Scare and the Hose album. Some people love that album. Some people let them down a little bit. Where was this Danny, right? Like, where was this Danny when we needed him? Like, this Danny
we are so back.
This Danny is fucking brutal. Like, the way every line delivery, like, he has this stilted, slow flow on this track, which is perfectly fitting for the beat that Kenny lays down. And he delivers his bars so that every single word feels tactile and snapping and just kind of splintering. And it's just so fucking intense and brutal. You know, you slip in that night like an old bitch nightgown. I ain't trying to hear about later. This is right now. You fellas ain't got shit like it's Nike Town. Danny Brown back like skinny white girls working out, about to get the money like curls. Like, he does this thing with his voice where he's so like emphasizing every like angular sound in all the words he's saying. Like, the way he says, set up, push up, bicycle kick. I'm like, it's like being slapped in the face. Every single word he says, it's fucking, I'm like,
and what makes it even better too is that not only is it a fantastic feature in and of itself, and that Danny Brown is fantastic on here, but it's an amazing counterpoint to Billy on this song, because at the start of it, it just starts with Billy just kind of saying fuck it and buying a gun to, you know, help save his own skin, and he kind of ups the stakes by what's happening by saying that anyone like him who makes it across state lines should be considered a veteran, which again emphasizes the contrasting feeling of like being stuck but being in transit theme of this album, which feels like a real undercurrent, like, you know, emphasizing mortality. And he says stuff like, you know, there's quicksand in every direction, again reinforcing danger but imposed stillness as well. And I feel like after this, Billy's kind of genuinely subversive on this set of bars here. Like, he's talking about his own material essentially. He's like kind of sarcastically imparting wisdom to kids, saying that they'll have to start a gang to make friends because Billy and those in his generation have poisoned everything that they've touched, in a sense, according to him, failing to save the next generation from the trappings that they've succumbed to. And it's an indictment of people who don't really practice what they preach, including Billy himself, that like through his own art, he might be reduced to just another voice in the crowd saying the same thing, because what is your art? What is your message without nuance or compassion to be understood with? Billy on this album, he views himself as an instrument of good, but as a blunt, ineffective one that has hit a brick wall. And then you have Danny come in to fulfill exactly the type of role that Billy feels like he might be slotted into. It's such an amazing counterpoint to like at most effectively demonstrate the sort of two viewpoints on this particular song. It's an inspired feature choice, frankly.
I don't think there's a more, I don't think I've heard a more like devastating and even dark indictment of the future, essentially, or of like the current state of America than the fucking couplet in this song where he talks about sooner or later there's going to be two unrelated active shooters in the same place at the same time. And then he's like, he says, yeah, and then he's like, great minds. And it's just like, fuck.
And the way he segues from that like really fucking dark notion into Hangman, which is like Billy like just full on disassociates in this song and only sees people before him as like paralyzed, you know, embodying that stasis of the record's main theme. And then saying that he wrote the verse like Hangman. What a terrifying way to put your artistic process, as though he's guided or forced to fill in the gaps by external forces that control him, keeping him away from like true creative liberty. The one thing that Billy has usurped by the powers that be. Like that's fucking grim, man. Jesus.
I mean, you on this song, Billy is like describing his process of drawing on the past, essentially, and like trying to make sense of the experiences that he's had and the things he's accrued. And he describes it in the most brutal way possible. I'm gonna keep it real with you. It's the things you can't undo. The past is a black Rubik's Cube, a time lapse, running in place like old cartoons. I'm old, I go in the booth like Cocoon. Like that, the past is a black Rubik's Cube is one of the most like
that's
stunning like metaphors for that state of mind, that sense of like complete
Bars.
There's nothing, there's everything is an empty void. Like, and one of the most striking sections on the entire record for me as well is this sort of abstract storytelling on, just to take a step back a bit, this abstract storytelling on Babylon by Bus completely floored me.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is something that Billy's really, really good at doing, is he starts with these seemingly unrelated or kind of difficult to interpret shards of images and eventually coheres them into something that has a deeper meaning that you don't realize until the final line of the whole verse. Like, I administer the food and drugs, monsoon love, oxytocin flood, red mud ran out the hills like blood, glistening water bug on clean counter, plague mask gave the place a curse and glower. He ran away, I gave chase, but gave up and sat on his gate for hours, pissing in a bottle, lampposts adorned with the missing. Listen, I'm not swimming in tomorrows, parachute twisted and snarled, just glad I kissed him, I knew the time was borrowed. Like, that whole verse as a kind of capturing what it is like to be looking out for someone who is, you know, whether it's in the throes of addiction or whether it's just someone who's really, really deathly ill, and having to kind of be there, but knowing that it's basically all for nothing. It's, and in the context of the album as well, like the idea of Billy kind of checking in on someone who's really, really struggling has this additional like futility to it, because he's always on the move. He can never be there long enough to really look after for someone else. He can never be there long enough to really make a difference, because the nature of the life he's leading keeps him moving, keeps him away from the people he cares about, keeps them away from his family. That to me is like one of the most brutal moments in the whole record as well. And you've got a couple of moments on this album where you get features from Elucid, Billy's partner in Arm & Hammer.
Fantastic.
And it's a nice little reminder of, you know, how contrasting but complementary their styles are. Billy as a vocalist has this just brutal tone to his delivery. Everything has this very urgent tone to his voice, and he's very clinical in the way that he speaks. And yeah, he's abstract in the same way that, you know, all these different rappers that he gets compared to is, but he's much more tangible and immediate than someone like Elucid, who raps with this style that is just like, I want to create the ugliest collisions of words possible. I want to like reference spitting and biting and snarling, and I want to have like these very visceral like violence to the words that I use.
Spitting the Our Father backwards and kick scripture. What a fucking lyric.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's Elucid's style. He's just like, he's very vulgar and random almost. Chanting eat a dick up till you hiccup. It's a formal invite. I know I'm wildin'. Clouds get violent too. Must every tree I plant bear fruit. Like, Elucid's just completely off the fucking chain here. That's one of the things that makes Arm & Hammer so great, but so overwhelming as well, is you have these two different styles that completely knock you over the head with everything that they say. My favorite song in the album, and maybe I think possibly my favorite song that Billy's ever made. I've just been listening to it so much this week. It was the single that preceded the album, and it
FaceTime.
really struck me then, and it's only gotten even better since. It is the track FaceTime with the legendary Samuel T. Herring from the great indie pop band Future Islands. And if you don't know who Samuel Herring is, then you're missing out, because while he may be the vocalist of an indie pop band, he is one of the most versatile people on the entire planet. He's also a rapper. He does metal vocals. He does everything, right? And he's coming here dropping the most soulful sounding hook. It's like fucking butter cutting
it's so
through
good.
the mire of Billy's dissociation and Billy's, because this song is where Billy's kind of at his darkest, essentially, in terms of, or at his most isolated in the process of being away from
Ready
home.
to die. It's no biggie.
It is most isolated in the process of being away from home, trying to live in the moment like death row, the sunset in the desert, red glow, redness in the west. I sip Mexico's best slow, mezcal Negroni, sitting atop the corral smoking, watching unbroken wild ponies run wild at sundown, only the lonely, big tree like a sundial. And then this, like, the way he kind of wanders through all these shows at this festival set, and it's kind of just like he's talks about being at a Playboy Cardi set and feeling the bass shaking the walls and being smoking alone in a cardigan. I love that set of lines so much. Went back down to the bar again, wig blown, after party packed like Parliament, ass cheeks and cheekbones, lips slightly parted, butter wouldn't melt. I gave her margarine. I'm looking like the help. Like, that's fucking funny, but just dire as hell as well. Like, Billy completely lost and having no clear fixed role, but whatever scene he wanders into. The vibe is animal pelts, chunky rings, clunky shoes, lots of ink, dudes who order everybody's drink. Really, I'm just waiting for my phone to ping. I'm thinking about you when I'm supposed to be thinking about other things. I don't go to sleep. I tread water till I sink. Like,
that's the best line on the album right there. That's the whole thing in one little tiny stanza. And it's just, you hear that and you're just like, damn.
It's a great song. Like, the wider context of what the song is about as well. Like, you know, as I said, the whole album touches on all the different ways which Billy's affected by the lifestyle he leads. But one of the biggest ways he's affected by it is how it makes his relationships difficult. You know, Billy has a baby mama, and Billy has a child, and Billy has these responsibilities, these real world things that are tying him down, that are important to him. But he doesn't know how to maintain those things, and he doesn't know how to be genuine and feel as though he's contributing in a meaningful way when he's living the life that he leads as well. And this sense of being too busy to be happy, or being too busy to be reliable, or being too busy to be a meaningful part of someone else's life, honestly something I can relate to an awful lot, right? It's like, I want to have all these things, and I want to be able to do all these things, and I can do all these things, but I'm too busy to do all these things. And that sense of being stuck while at the same time doing a million things at once is something that FaceTime is like so good at communicating. And then you have Agriculture, which has just got one of the most haunting instrumentals of the entire album, just completely
one of my favorites on here, completely
show-stopping. And again, the sense of loss of identity in all these different places is coming really to hit Barry, to hit Billy more and more as he's on this tour for a longer and longer time. It's land on either side of the car. It's places no one knows who you are. It's faces we never wore, people we couldn't be before. It's still things we never saw, but I don't want to see more. I let the dog out the screen door.
Agriculture is just a song about how paranoia just affects you in, like, even the most serene moments, and like just moments where you think you're safe or you take solace in and of yourself. And it's emphasized by that like dreamy backing beat, but it's still occupying like this liminal state, like between life and death, and like for your own sanity, that like it conversely makes you go insane as you intentionally limit your own horizons. And that's just like, again, deeply fucking relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't said enough about Kenny Segal as well, and how good he is at complimenting Billy. Here's a great showcase in the final stretch of the record. I think that Houdini and Waiting Around back to back have some of his best beats. Like the instrumental to Houdini in particular has just been kind of rattling around in my head. I love it so much. Again, those really clinical, those really harsh drum hits that he infuses with this, you know, sort of moody, mournful jazz adjacent, but cut up beat style is really, really great. The feature from Aesop Rock on Waiting Around it's an Aesop Rock verse, right? It's such a good fit. And there's like this, the way that Aesop Rock's flow complements the really clattering percussive, like it's a kind of complex percussive loop, but it's like Aesop finds a pocket inside of it, and together there's just this like counterpoint within the two that's just fucking amazing. Like it's a kind of subtle detail you don't really notice until you really like pay attention to what's happening between the flow and the beat, but it's just these little tiny things are so beautiful. And then again, I mentioned the album has this kind of framing of getting ready to go on tour, like the departure, you know, the dissociative free fall into all these different events, and then the arrival back home. And that lands with NYC Tap Water, which is one of the hardest hitting songs on a record full of hard hitting songs for me. There's this kind of like, you know, on the surface, there's this coziness to it. Like Billy's arriving home and he's got his cat there, and his cat's been missing him, and he's able to like lay low and crack a fresh pound, and he's able to sort of settle into this kind of relaxation. But also at the same time, he can't be relaxed as well. Through the peephole, I see new people going up and down the stairs, new buildings just appear, kind of harkening back to the opening track and that kind of threat of gentrification, that threat of change that you cannot control, that you can only kind of be thrown into as you leave and as you come back, and things are different. And he has a great line at the end of the song as well. Don't get it twisted. The city's wicked. It'll crush you with its feet. Death in a top hat, dance a jig in the street. Like it's real.
The fucking closer, man. It's like on the surface, like a low key end to the album. And it doesn't resolve or conclude an arc as much as it like shows the logical endpoint of the existence of someone who's caught up in the trappings of the issues the album's been discussing, ultimately like just coming full circle as Billy contemplates how long he has to live as he spends time with his child in the park, like remarking subtly about how like the kids fighting with others and how they used to do the same, they and him. And it's like it's a microcosm for like the generational themes on the album that are occasionally touched up upon. It's a really powerful understated way to end that theme, as Billy just sort of finds himself at a crossroads, sort of like perplexed as to how he's going to move forward, if he can move forward at all, which is again a perfect distillation of that stasis that's on this record. And it really just it's a really harrowing moment, and it's all because of what is left unsaid on this track. And it's also again production on here fucking tight as a drum, perfect, immaculate, fantastic.
There's a nice contrast in the song with Elucid as well, who has the first verse on the track. And it's kind of like about how both of them, the song's theme, I guess, is about how both of them kind of settle into domesticity and establish a kind of routine, right? And for Elucid, routine is really, very, very important. And it gives him this sense of like forward movement, even through doing very simple, rehearsed, straightforward things. But it gives him a sense of moving forward and progressing. Whereas for Billy, when he settles into a home life routine, when he's kind of gotten through the wilderness of the touring, he's just kind of lost, and he's consumed by anxieties, and he's unable to kind of sit still or even enjoy something as simple as pushing his kid on a swing at the park, because that becomes so contextualized by, well, this moment will be over soon, and maybe who knows if it's going to be the last one or not. So you get a real sense of how the different ways that you can respond to, both healthily and unhealthily, the pressures of leading this kind of lifestyle. And it's a perfect end for the album conceptually. Yeah, it's amazing. It's a Billy Woods album. It's
a Billy Woods album.
It's a Billy Woods album.
It's a spaghetti and a meatball.
He was cooking.
That's too many Pete Davidsons.
They were cooking.
The one thing I want to say about this album is that like there is nothing on here that is anything less than excellent. However, I will say the 3 tracks near the end, Houdini, Waiting Around, and NYC Tap Water, I'm still a little bit less sure how I feel like these fit into the overarching theme of the album. And it's not even really through fault of their own. It's just that the other songs string together so clearly for me in my head. And I don't even necessarily think that that's because of these three songs. Like maybe I just haven't gotten there yet. I think that what you said about NYC Tap Water actually might help me kind of lock things into place a little bit. And I'm sure months from now, I might have a different opinion. It's just that is really the only thing holding me back from saying I think this is as good as Hiding Places or Ethiops. And it's, again, it's a tiny itty bitty small thing. And it's probably just because I haven't had enough time to put into it. Like I want these to make sense to me as much as the rest of the album. But again, with Billy, everything is operating at such a maximal technical way that like it just takes time, you know?
Yeah, I think for sure. There's one of my favorite moments in the album is actually on the song Houdini, and it's one of my favorite little ways in which Billy sort of captures how his kind of busy state kind of heightens his anxiety. You know, he gets increasingly claustrophobic as the song goes on, and increasingly insular in his perspective. And eventually he talks about walking into the forest filled with fear. I couldn't see it coming, but I could hear it, something lumbering near. Woken up suddenly in an armchair. Cousin like you, good to drive. Bro, I'm the tip of the spear. And that's funny because it's like, he's in this fucking nightmare where he's being hunted down essentially, and you can picture someone essentially with a spear kind of like ready to kind of just throw it at him and just kind of completely slay him in one fell swoop. And he wakes up, and then he wakes up, he's drawn back into a reality, and suddenly he has to be that person behind him. He has to be that thing driving forward. He has to be that thing with purpose. He has to be the killer, basically. And it's such a great moment on the album in terms of capturing his mind state. But yeah, the record's full of beautiful lines like that. If our review is a little bit fragmented, it's only because that's kind of how it's kind of hard to you have to really write notes and to prepare a thesis to be able to attack this in a way that is,
you have to really get into the woods.
Yeah, you have to really go deep if you're gonna like address this all in a very coherent way, and we're a little bit incoherent, but it's a great album. There's so much to love about it. There's so much that it keeps revealing itself to me. It's currently my number 3 album of the year, but I've got it basically at the same score as my number 2 anyway.
It's gonna be the hip hop album to beat this year for me, for sure.
100%. All right, let's do our favorite tracks and ratings for Billy Woods and Kenny Segal's Maps. They don't love you like I love you.
Oh no.
Wait.
My 3 favorite songs are, it's really hard to just pick 3. Obviously, I'm going to say FaceTime, which is a very strong contender for my song of the year so far. I haven't actually given a lot of thought to where I would place it, but it's absolutely top 3 songs of the year. I'll also put in, the album starts so strong. I mean, the whole album, it never drops the ball for me. I'm going to pick Year Zero just because the way Danny enunciates on that song is just, every time I think about it, it's like getting a spade to the back of the head. So I'll say Year Zero. I think the storytelling and the way that the beat progresses on Babylon by Bus is fucking dizzying.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that as well. But I also just want to say the first 4 songs because I think they're a fucking perfect run to, and they're not even in my top 3. It's just, yeah. It's getting a fucking 9 out of 10 for me. There is no least favorite.
Yeah, my 3 favorites. First one I'll shout out is NYC Tap Water. It's something about that song in particular. Just to me, it's the feeling of coming home, and it conveys that feeling in a way that's particular to New York, in a way that I just find really evocative. But I will also shout out FaceTime and Rapper Weed. Yeah, no least favorites. Going with a hearty 9 out of 10 for now.
Oh, we win. Jake.
Gonna co-sign my podcast mates say FaceTime is a perfect song. I'm gonna also say Agriculture is maybe one of the most underrated songs on here, one of my favorites. And gotta go with the sheer brutality of Hangman. That's just that's an absolutely show-stopping moment for me. And yeah, no least favorites. 8.5 asterisk right now.
I'm gonna have continental breakfast, chicken and weave, knock and roll in my head the whole year. Like it's just it is musical butter. How does he do that? I can't believe that's the same guy that sang fucking Seasons Waiting on You. Cause I've been waiting on you. Anyway, both great songs.
Shout out Titan.
Let us know what you think of either of the albums we reviewed today, Ed Sheeran's Minus or Billy Woods and Kenny Segal's Maps. Did you enjoy them? Did you hate them? Let us know what you think. Let us know your perspectives in the comments below. Let us know your favorite songs. Let us know your favorite things about them. Let us know if you disagree with us on anything or if you think we're on the money. Either way, hit us up in the comments below. Let us know. Helps us out a lot. And also, we'd love to get interaction. It's basically the whole reason we do this. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Both those things also help us out a lot. Plus, if you want to go above and beyond, support the channel directly for just $1 a month. You can hit the join button and become a member of the JMST family. Get your name on the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to talk about in our Now episodes, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile.
Until next time, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, kayak, confident travel starts at kayak.